Hello and welcome to another episode of the Maxi-Geek Show. Today is Friday, May 6th, and this is episode number 17. It's been an interesting week this week because it's been fairly quiet. Japan was continuing their Golden Week celebrations. It was basically just a lot of public holidays in sort of the one span of time, so they sort of extended it out as a big celebration. Beyond that, there wasn't really a lot. I mean, there was some big news, but there wasn't a lot of news like there is in sort of traditional weeks. But we are going to be trying something a little different going forward. We're going to focus on like a half a dozen, news items, as well as the sort of releases coming up in the next week or so. Obviously, this is still a bit of a work in progress, so bear with us while we get this sorted out. As always, the Maxi-Geek Show is powered by Rig Gaming. I'm wearing, as always, the lovely HS700 headset, which is, the perfect headset for anyone who wants to game and not worry about having big, nasty headphones on their head. But let's get into the news. There's been one big news story earlier in the week, and that is that the Embracer Group. Oh, wonderful! The Embracer Group, get the words out there, is buying up some of the Western developers from Square Enix. So Square Enix for quite a long time have always, let's say, been less than accepting about the performance of some of their Western developed titles. In instance, Tomb Raider series, the Deus Ex series, more recently the Marvel games that they've developed, they've been less than optimistic, less than satisfied with the sales results. Unfortunately, we've also seen through documentation about filings for how much money they make and things like that, that they've always overestimated the popularity. So they'll set, say, a benchmark for, say, a Tomb Raider game at 15 million units, and when it sells 10 million units, they complain that it wasn't enough. But any company that can sell 10 million copies of a single game is doing pretty well. So for years, they've sort of had this love and hate relationship, I suppose, with some of the Western developed games. Not all of their developers are being sold off, so there's still a number of them. So things like Avalanche Software. Now that is not Avalanche. Avalanche Software is the one doing the what do you call it? The Hogwarts game. Avalanche Studios. That's the one that has all the Just Cause games. They did the Rage game for Bethesda, and then they also did, what was it, Mad Max. So there's been a lot of things that they've done over the years as well, which has generally been accepted without an issue. So the three studios, I should say, that they're selling off is Crystal Dynamics, which are located outside of Los Angeles in California, Eidos Montreal, which are located in Montreal, and Square Enix Montreal. Square Enix Montreal is more well known for their development work on Hitman Go, Lara Croft Go, Hitman Sniper, most recently launched a few months ago. So they've done things like that. Now, Square Enix is still holding on to Square Enix London, Square Enix Europe. There was another one. They do a bunch of things. So they're not getting rid of all sort of outside Japan, developed titles, but they are sort of getting rid of the bigger ones. Obviously, the Embracer Group is a big company now. As it says here, with the purchase, there'll be more than 14,000 employees, 10,000 engaged as developers, 124 internal studios, bringing more than 230 games to market. So Embracer is massive, and obviously they are the company that owns Gearbox, THQ Nordic, Koch Media, Saber Interactive, Dark Horse Comics, and a whole bunch of smaller studios that sort of report into them. The deal's worth $300 million US, so it is, you know, a pretty penny for what they're getting. Roughly 425 million Australian bucks. What is interesting though is if Square Enix were looking to offload, you know, Crystal Dynamics, who did the first two Tomb Raider games and then more recently Avengers, I honestly would have thought that they would have been snapped up by Microsoft, because Microsoft has already partnered with them to co-develop the initiative's reboot of Perfect Dark. So I honestly thought it would have gone that way, and that it would have been, you know, them working alongside, you know, somebody who they already basically had a contract with. But it seems not. It seems that they've just gone for the one thing. Obviously, you know, as a you know, not a merger or an acquisition per se, as more of a, you know, essentially garage sale. This doesn't seem to be any regulatory approval required for this one, unlike say the Activision buyout from Microsoft. I do love this line from Phil Rogers, the Square Enix America and Europe CEO. It says, "Embracer is the best kept secret in gaming, a massive decentralized collection of entrepreneurs whom we're thrilled to be part of today." So okay, cool. Except Europe's still being left alone by Square, and Embracer isn't really a secret anymore when they own so many developers. Earlier in the year, I did a look into the Embracer studio. You know, sort of deep dive into, you know, what PlayStation is doing, what Xbox are doing, all that sort of stuff. Let me see if I can find the link for it. And, you know, I went through and said, cool, you know, this is what this company's doing, this is what that company's doing. The interesting thing about the Embracer group then, it's funny because they still have so many more studios. But the Embracer group then, you know, so they own Gearbox, who, you know, obviously do Tiny Tina's Wonderland back in March. That's obviously published by 2K. It's not a game. It's not a license that they have control over yet. Maybe once the you know, contract ends with 2K, that'll change. But for now, 2K still publish and have the rights to the Borderlands series and all the subsequent spin-offs and such. But they're also doing Saints Row, so we're getting Saints Row from them as well. But, you know, this is just a quick summary. You know, so Gearbox Entertainment is the company that owns Gearbox Software, and their most sort of successful and well-known secondary part of that is Gearbox Publishing. So Tribes of Midgard, Homeworld, that weird Goldfall, you know, so they're all published by Gearbox Publishing, but developed completely externally. So Gearbox Software, Gearbox Studios Quebec and Montreal, just basically sister studios as a Gearbox Publishing. Perfect World Entertainment, so Remnant from the Ashes, the Torchlight series, and a bunch of MMOs are all done by those guys. Cryptic Studios, so Star Trek Online, Neverwinter Online, they're all a part of the Embracer group, and they're all part of the Gearbox side. Deep Silver, we've got Dambuster, who've only really shipped one game, but there's a bit of a history there. You know, I'll throw the story here in the chat, so anyone who's wants to read into it can. Fish Labs, they do a lot of stuff for Galaxy on Fire. Free Radical Design spun back up last year, so they're working on a new Time Splitters game. Volition, as I said, is the Saints Row folks. Warhorse Studios have only done one game, and that's Kingdom Come Deliverance, right? But they're all part of the Deep Silver brand. And we get into Koch Media. So Flying Wild Hog, you know, they shipped Shadow Warrior early this year. They shipped Trek to Yomi today. They've still got a few more games coming out. Milestone, MotoGP, Monster Hunter Energy, and last year they did the Hot Wheels game. Prime Matter isn't technically a developer, they're more like a publisher, kind of like the EA Originals program. So they're doing a lot of things for, you know, the Last Uruk-hai, Dolmen, Gungrave Core, and a few others. Raven Squad are there, they make singing games. Vertigo Games do a lot of VR stuff, so there's a lot of stuff there. Saber Interactive is probably the one that most people won't realize is now sort of an overarching thing. So Saber Interactive, you know, they did the Switch ports for Witcher. They did another one. I can't think what it is now. But you know, they also developed, you know, the Mud Runners game and things like that. 34 Big Things is doing Redout 2 later this month. 3D Realms, you know, Duke Nukem people, but Duke Nukem, the license is owned by Gearbox, so it's all technically now part of the same family again. 4A Games do Metro. It's been a couple of years since we've had a Metro game, so they'll probably be back with more. Aspire, their biggest thing they're working on now is the Knights of the Old Republic remake. We'll get into that a bit later. But they're also the studio that have brought half a dozen Star Wars games to Switch and other platforms, as well as various other things as well. We've got Fractured Byte. They've done Brother: A Tale of Two Sons. New World Interactive does the Insurgency series. They just released one of those last year for consoles. Slipcoat Ironworks, they're working on Craven. Zen Studios is well known for their pinball games, but they're also working on a brand new RPG coming later this year. And you get into THQ Nordic, so you've got Appeal Studios who are working on Outcast 2. Black Forest Games are doing the Destroy All Human stuff. Gunfire Games is well known for the Darksiders series. Nine Rocks Games, they just announced their first game the other day. I can't remember what it is, but they just announced it. Purple Lamp Studios, they did the SpongeBob SquarePants Battle from Bikini Bottom Rehydrated a couple of years ago, and they're also working on SpongeBob SquarePants Cosmic Shake for this year. And Rainbow Studios is now working on the MX vs ATV Legends, which just got delayed a few months as well. So, and that's literally it. So what is interesting, when I put this list together back in like January 15 or something, there were 111 studios across the company. They're now at 124. So in the space of 4 months, they've added another 15 or so studios, which is quite an insane speed of acquisitions. Like people have been giving Microsoft a bit of grief for they announced in one press conference a few years ago they added like 4 studios. And people sort of said, hey, that's a bit crazy, slow down. Embracer had that many, in one transaction. So yeah, it is interesting what this means for the future of Tomb Raider, because it's not just, they didn't just buy Crystal Dynamics, they bought the IPs. So Embracer own the Tomb Raider license, they own the Deus Ex license, they own the Legacy of Kain. We haven't seen that series in decades now. They also picked up an additional 50 IP. We don't know the full list of IP that have been included in the transaction, but as I said, we know a few of them. So it's very interesting that they're doing this, and they've said any existing contracts are still going to be any existing contracts will still be honoured. So the Crystal Dynamics working on the Perfect Dark reboot is still going to be the case. But yeah, it's just sort of one of those interesting things where people are focusing on Microsoft, and they're buying of Activision, or PlayStation, and they're buying of Bungie. And then you've got Embracer Group, which has bought out more studios, more companies in the past 2 years than the others combined, and nobody bats an eye at them doing it. So it is very, very interesting when you look at it in that context. Moving on from Embracer, though, we're going to be talking about a bit of a sad thing, and that is that the Nintendo experience at EB Games Swanston Street has closed down. So, as being reported out here by Voox.net, the Nintendo experience initially opened back in December of 2008. So it's been about 13 and a half years now. And this was sort of, it wasn't a Nintendo store. So New York has had it for years. They've had a Nintendo store. Tokyo's had one now for a number of years. It wasn't a Nintendo store per se. It's more just a Nintendo experience, as they like to say. They actually opened up 2 initially when they first did. And the second one was in side of Maya in the Pitt Street Mall in Sydney. That only lasted about 2 years, I think, before they closed it down there. But the one here, being that Nintendo is based out of Melbourne here in Australia, they use this for midnight launches. If you look through some of these photos, so this is what it looks like now. It's all roped off. The lights are off. There's no product up there. But we had Wii launch parties, 3DS launch parties, Wii U launch parties. There were gaming events there were tournaments, there were giveaways. Charles Martinet, who's the voice of Mario, Luigi, and 50,000 other in Mario Universe characters, was there for a while as well. Back in late September, October 2018, They renovated the entire thing, filled it with switches, and it got about a year and a half worth of use before they shut it because of the pandemic. So Nintendo haven't officially announced why it closed. I did take these photos for Vooks, and the staff member that I spoke with in the store did mention that it's just a funding thing. Maybe they weren't seeing the return on the investment they were hoping for from it. The last midnight launch that those guys hosted there, which obviously if you're not a big gamer, you're probably not aware of the whole midnight launch sort of side of it. But the last one was for Pokemon Sword and Shield, and that was November 2019. So it really went underused for a couple of years. So they were still paying the bill for a space that wasn't accessible. And even when it was open, there was the whole thing about not touching surfaces for so long. So yeah, it obviously didn't get as much use over the last couple of years, and maybe they just realized, hey, we're not doing much with it now. Obviously, Nintendo is doing their own store, so they're selling various items here and there across their own web store. The lineup is definitely nowhere near what it is in New York or Tokyo, and obviously Japan has a few pop-up locations that they spin up every now and again when they want to sell more things. And obviously the theme park, so Super Nintendo World in Japan at Universal Studios has a lot of merchandise, and then obviously there is a store now open at Universal Studios Hollywood in preparation for the Super Nintendo World opening there next year. That has a lot of unique merchandise. So Nintendo's got other avenues of selling it, so maybe that was another reason they didn't need to keep something like this open anymore, because they don't have direct control over when the experience is open. They're reliant on EB Games, so I'm not saying they're going to, but it could mean that they're going to open up their own store. That could be something they're looking at doing as part of this sort of let's just say sort of modernization of what's around, because everything that we've come to expect from Nintendo has sort of been flipped on its head over the past few years. I'm not saying that's what they're going to do. I'm just saying that we've had various things happen like that where we've expected one thing and something else completely different has occurred. So it is interesting that sort of out of nowhere as well. I was there a couple of weeks ago and it was open. It was full of stock. It was full of consoles. But this was 10:30, 11 o'clock on a Wednesday morning. There wasn't anyone up there apart from the guy working the counter for EB. So it isn't exactly, drawing people in every day. But again, when they hosted these midnight launches, you would get 200-300 people there. Some would dress up as their favorite Nintendo character. If it was a Pokemon thing, there'd be people dressed up as trainers carrying stuffed Pokemon around. So people went all out for these sort of events. And it does make me wonder that Nintendo may no longer do these sort of things going forward. Which, especially over the last couple of years with the pandemic, a lot of that stuff has shifted, and it is a little sad that we're sort of moving away from it. I'm fortunate enough that I can say I've been on both sides of the equation. I've done the, going there to pick up something at midnight, and I've also done the working there at midnight. And the working side of things is always fun because, I worked for EB Games for a number of years, and when these events came along, we'd be in there at 10 p.m. making sure we had, bags with the games in the bags ready to go. If there was a console launch, like, Xbox 360, PS3, things like that, we would have everything, we'd have people's names stuck to them so we knew how many people were coming in, how many consoles and all that we had to have. So it was a lot of prep work, and it was always very interesting and a little weird at the same time, because people would line up at 10:30, 11 o'clock, and we're not opening until midnight because 12:01 a.m. Because street dates and all that. But it was always cool to be putting this game that somebody wants, like the World of Warcraft collector's editions, when they had those, putting those in bags and just seeing fans of the product or fans of the game essentially staring through the window like you're in some sort of giant aquarium, and they're watching you put the thing they've come to buy in a bag. So it was always sort of unique that way. But obviously where I lived, those stores weren't as big as something like, Swanston Street in the Melbourne CBD. But what was cool is it would be a rush. Like the first sort of 15 minutes, 30 minutes, depending on what it was, it would be, just go, 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 just consistent. And then once the rush of people died off, you know, you had to wait for another hour or so, and you were sort of standing around there at 1 a.m. in the middle of a shopping center when there's nothing else open, and you're just sort of going, this is cool. Not sure what we're doing, but okay, you know. So yeah, as I said, I've been on both sides of the events, and I do hope they come back, because I know some people will be a bit, you know, not grouchy about it, I suppose, but just sort of against the idea of them. But I think they're fantastic events because, you know, it's not, you don't just go there to buy the game. If you're doing that, you can just buy it digitally and you'd have it ready to go the moment it unlocks. But you're going there and you talk with the people that are in line, right? You know, you'll see somebody walking past dressed as Master Chief for their Halo launch, and you'll be like, that's a cool costume, right? Maybe you'll take a photo with them, just talk with them, talk with the guys standing next to you in line that are doing the same thing. So it's a way, just a way to build a community around the things that you already like. So a lot of games these days, especially over the past couple of years, a lot of gaming has been very insular. You know, you're at home, you've got a headset on, and you're talking over a microphone about the game you're playing. And when you're playing Call of Duty online with friends or with random people, you can't start talking about Mario Kart or, you know, World of Warcraft if you're playing, you know, Call of Duty. You have to keep the topic on the game you're playing, because if you start talking about Mario Kart, people are going to get really pissy at you. So these events really do open up more avenues for people to sort of talk about games in general, talk about other aspects of their lives, you know, and it's just sort of a way to build a community, which is another reason why events like PAX are so big, is because it's not about going to play, you know, the biggest game, you know, before anyone else, or, you know, going and hearing somebody talk about their experience for an hour. Excuse me. But it's about, you know, when you're standing in line to play the game, or you're waiting in it with a group of people for a panel to start. It's about having those conversations and you know, creating those friendships. So yeah, it is very interesting that, you know, out of nowhere Nintendo closed this you know, again, not a store. You know, I was there for a few things. I was there for the 3DS sort of. It wasn't a launch per se. It was like a preview event. You know, and that's what convinced me then not to get one day one. Which I have always. I've gotten every console from the GameCube onwards day one, except a Nintendo 3DS and a PlayStation 3. Mostly because the PS3 was $1,000. That was ridiculous. But yeah, so it is interesting that they've closed it. We have to wait and see if they actually do come out and say why, and if they're going to replace it with something else. But in the meantime, they do have their Nintendo store, where they do sell, you know, some merchandise, and then they have obviously their rewards for the Nintendo members. So there are other things you can get from them as well. Moving on to some more interesting news, the Summer Games Fest program has announced when they're kicking off their big live stream. So I say this every year, but Jeff Keighley really needs to get a better name for this, because it is not summer around the entire planet when this happens. It is summer for half of the planet, the other half it's winter. But the Summer Games Fest, which generally runs June, July, the first year he ran it in 2020 was, you know, 2020? Maybe in 2019. But it went for like 3.5 months. It was sort of ridiculous. But he sort of starts it around the E3, the weekend before E3. And it sort of runs on and off over the next couple of months over sort of Comic-Con time. And then he sort of finishes at the end of July, because in August he does the Gamescom event. We don't know anything about Summer Games Fest, the showcase yet, except it will be on at 4 a.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time. So it's 4 a.m. for Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane and Hobart. 3:30 a.m. for Adelaide and Darwin, and a very early 2 a.m. for those in Perth. The other thing too is, you know, all the marketing you're going to see for this is going to say June 9th. That is the US day. For us, it is June 10. We do know that once this show runs, it will end, and then it'll run into the Day of the Devs, which is the Double Fine Productions sort of indie spotlight showcase, which generally goes for around 30 to 40 minutes, and they'll bring in, you know, 4 or 5 games and let the developers talk about them. It's kind of like an Indie World, you know, an ID at Xbox showcase, but it's sort of more curated. It's not like a catch-all for everything. You know, they're very, very particular about the games they show off at these events. Beyond that, we don't know anything else about it. We don't know, you know, who is going to be in the showcase. So, you know, Ubisoft, EA, Epic, Xbox, PlayStation, you know, Warner Brothers, Capcom, Sega, you know, the various subsidiaries that some of those own, they're all going to be involved in some way. You know, we might have a PlayStation showcase as part of it. You know, there might be a Ubisoft Forward event as part of it, or just running through it, which is sort of tagged on with this. Well, this tags on with that, I should say. The only company we know that's not involved is Nintendo. They never are. They do their own thing. They have for years now. But yeah, June 10 for this one. So this is the Friday after... sorry, the Friday before the Xbox showcase, which we'll get to that in a moment as well. So yeah, so if you're looking to have sort of a big weekend, this is Friday morning at 4 AM, and then Xbox is Monday morning. So you know, it is a very, very big you know, window there. Normally in between something like that, you know, we'd have you know, Bethesda would normally have their Sunday night show after the Xbox One in the afternoon. Obviously they don't need to do that anymore. So there's always a lot of stuff leading into. EA used to host their stuff on the Saturday in Los Angeles. So yeah, it is interesting they're doing it that way. Whether or not they're going to continue doing it that way, we'll have to wait and see. But for now, that's what they're doing. But speaking of Xbox, they've announced that FanFest is happening again for the Xbox and Bethesda Games Showcase. So if you don't know what FanFest is, it is it's a community sort of style event where they host, you know, throughout the year, randomly in random locations, events, you know, for fans. It's literally just a way for Xbox to have people come together. Obviously, over the past few years, they haven't done them, you know, because pandemic, but they're bringing them back. So the reason why it's being announced here is because in Melbourne on the Monday, which is the public holiday for most of the East Coast, which is the Queen's birthday weekend, the FanFest event is taking over a cinema somewhere in Melbourne. Well, I say cinema, they've done it in the past, we don't know yet. But they're taking over a location in Melbourne for fans who have registered to attend and watch the Xbox and Bethesda showcase live alongside other fans. We know that the showcase is starting at 3. We don't know any other details about this event yet, other than it is in Melbourne. In years past, it's been at the Hoyts Cinemas in Melbourne CBD at Melbourne Central, and they will tack on a movie afterwards. So you'll watch the showcase, then go out, have a break, come back in, watch a movie. I think last time they did this one in person was 2019, and it was $20 for a ticket, but you got food, drink, the movie, and a few other goodies as well. As I said, they've literally not confirmed anything other than the fact that it's going to be in Melbourne. You know, there's literally, you just have to, you know, follow the steps in on the website. Once you've logged in for your FanFest account, say you want to do the watch party, and you're sort of done. There's two watch parties. I have to be clear on this. One watch party is exclusively for at home, so you're just going to be watching it online, right? It's just basically a reminder to say, hey, I want to watch this stuff. The in-person FanFest event, that's the one we don't have details on yet. What this means in the long term, we don't know. As I said, we don't know where it is, if it's going to cost anything, how long it's going to run for. We know nothing. So it is very, very, very early. But this is, you know, they've put it out there that, hey, you know, in 6.5 weeks, 6 weeks, 6 and a bit weeks, you know, there will be an in-person event for those in Melbourne who want to go to sort of, you know, watch the showcase live with people, you know, and basically just sort of embrace everything Xbox and Bethesda. We don't know if there's going to be a limit on this. Again, we don't know where it is. So if it's at, you know, Joe's artisan, you know, house of, you know, antiques or something, it may be 50 people. If it's inside a movie theater, it depends on the size of the theater. If they book out something like the Melbourne Convention Centre and fill out one of the main theatres from like PAX, you know, it could be a couple of thousand people. So we really don't know the specifics yet, and until then, it's very hard to sort of judge how this is going to go. But we know in years past they've done a lot of things for it, where they've sort of embraced everything that they can to make this sort of event, you know, a bit of an E3 thing. I'll be honest, I've never gone in person to this because I've always been in Los Angeles at the Microsoft Theater, in person for their shows. So, I've never had the need to go to these events, but I know that people who have gone have said they've been good fun. But yeah, it's just one of those things that if you're someone who's into this sort of stuff, it's definitely one way of checking it all out. Some sad news and weird news in the world of Prince of Persia is up next. So what is interesting here is that the Prince of Persia Sands of Time remake. So that is the official name. It's the Prince of Persia, the Sands of Time remake. Development on that started a number of years ago at Ubisoft Mumbai and Ubisoft Pune. And when this was announced back in September of 2020 at the first Ubisoft Forward event, it was dated to release in January of 2021. I think it was January 21st. Mere days, like 6 days before the game was set to release, it was delayed till March or May, one of them. It's literally down in the store. I could just scroll down and see it. March 31st it was supposed to release, but then by mid-February, they announced it's been delayed again till September, and then around E3 time, so sort of June 2021, they announced it would not be releasing that year, and they had no plans on when it would release. So the game was literally days away from releasing, and Ubisoft said, hey, no, it's not good enough, we're going to delay it to polish it some more, giving it another couple of months, which they've done that before. They did it with Far Cry 6, they delayed that like 6 months. They did it with Riders Republic, they did it with Rainbow Six Extraction, because they've learned in the past not to release games in less than optimal states, if we put it that way. But then, it got delayed, a third time into a date unknown. And now the news is that it's been delayed sort of yet again, but development is also leaving the Mumbai and Pune studios and being picked up by Montreal, which is where the series, but the Ubisoft version of the series got its start. So this is the original development house that made the Sands of Time in the first place. Why this is interesting is that the game has probably been in development for 3 years, 4 years at this point, if not a bit longer. And sometime between when they first delayed it and now, the game has never managed to meet the expectations that Ubisoft, at the high level, wanted for it. So basically they've given them a couple of chances. They've never been able to hit the goals required, or something else is happening. We don't know the details. But development has now shifted across to another studio. Now this isn't that Montreal is now coming in to help the Mumbai and Pune studios work on this. No, this is that the full development has moved away. So Montreal, that's the flagship studio for Ubisoft, which is kind of ironic considering Ubisoft is a French company, not a Canadian company. And I know they speak French in Canada, but it's not the same. But yeah, so Ubisoft Montreal is where Far Cry is made. It's where the Prince of Persia games were made. It's where Assassin's Creed has been made primarily. It's sort of the studio. They've got something like 4,000 staff members at this one location, right? It is massive, and this is where primarily the games are developed from. Other studios do their own things from time to time. We see it with like Ubisoft Red Links, and who do the Trial series. We've seen it with Ubisoft Milan is doing Mario and Rabbids. Montpellier is doing, they've done Rayman in the years past. Ubisoft Ivory Tower is San Francisco, and they sort of work on various things as well. So there's a lot of developers, a lot of studios around the world that do their own things, but Montreal sort of where the big tentpole games, if you will, are developed. But then there are studios that do support things. So I did it, let me see if I can find it. I did it earlier. Oh no, wrong thing. When I did the Embracer one and that, I did one for Ubisoft as well. Let me bring that up if I can find it. So, you know, so this is all the studios that Ubisoft own. Now, officially, they like to call them Ubisoft, you know, and then the city name. Some of them, however, have standard names. So, you know, 1942 Studios, a more recently acquired studio for them. They've done a series of mobile games that are episodic. Blue Mammoth Games is the developer behind Brawlhalla, so they're working on those. Future Games of London is a mobile studio that develops the Hunger Shark series. Green Panda Games is doing just mobile games. Ivory Tower is the Crew developer, and there's a big rumor that the Crew 3 will be announced this year. Ketchap does mobile games, same with Kolibiri Games. Massive Entertainment is where the Division series got its start. This is also the studio that developed the Snowdrop engine, which is the game that powers the Division. It's powering the Avatar game they're working on. While I talk, I'll put that trailer on because it is a pretty stunning trailer. Pop it up into the proper resolution. It's also the engine that powers the Mario and Rabbids games. So, you know, it's a very versatile engine. So they're doing that. They're also doing a Star Wars game, but we'll get into that in a moment as well. So Ubisoft Massive is technically massive in size. They're one of the biggest studios outside of Montreal. Unfortunately, this trailer doesn't really show a lot of gameplay. It just shows a lot of, you know, visual style for it, which is cool. Nadeo does Trackmania. Oleant does a lot of their sort of mobile free-to-play stuff. Red Storm isn't a developer directly these days as much as they used to be. So Red Storm was created by Tom Clancy to create the Rainbow Six game on PC back in the day, long before Ubisoft got their hooks into the series and destroyed it. But, you know, they did the Ghost Recon games as well. Their most recently developed title that they sort of did on their own was Star Trek Bridge Crew, which is the VR game. They do a lot of support work, you know, for the Tom Clancy brand. So other studios will lead development, but these guys will support them. Red Lynx, as I said, does Trials. And this is where we get into sort of the specific city-based areas, right? So Red Lynx is known as Ubisoft... I can't think of what they're called now. But there's like, it's not Kyiv, but it's, you know, they're in Sweden. It's like Ubisoft Stockholm or something, right? But Ubisoft Abu Dhabi, you know, they do the Growtopia game. Ubisoft Annecy, which is in France, they're doing the Steep games and Riders Republic currently. Barcelona did the Assassin's Creed 3 remastering. Their mobile studio has done Might and Magic, you know, things. And we've got Belgrade, Berlin, Bordeaux. These mostly development support studios, so they don't develop games primarily on their own, but they support the development of things out of Montreal and Paris. Bucharest, Chengdu. Chengdu, they shipped recently the Assassin's Creed Ezio trilogy on Switch, so it wasn't just a straight port, they redid everything for the Switch for that one. Da Nang does Ubisoft Nano, which, if you've never heard of Ubisoft Nano, is a very interesting project. It is basically free-to-play web-based games featuring things. So they've got like a Bomberman clone full of Ubisoft characters. Ubisoft Dusseldorf, you know, they're most known for the Settlers, which is, they're currently bringing out another Settlers, which was delayed recently. They also did a VR exclusive Prince of Persia game called The Dagger of Time. And that's one of those VR room ones that, you know, you have to go to a location, you wear the backpack with the computer, and you know, do the VR. You know, Ubisoft Kyiv again is a support studio. Leamington, you know, that used to be what were they called? They did DJ Hero and Sing Party. I've got here, but I can't think of what their name is. You know, Mains is doing the Anno series. I said Milan's doing Mario and Rabbids. Montpellier, which is the studio that was sort of founded for Michel Hansi, who's doing the, you know, did Rayman. That's where Beyond Good and Evil 2 is being developed out of, whatever state that happens to be in. As I said, Montreal is the powerhouse. Mumbai, Odessa, Osaka, Paris. Paris does Just Dance. They do that every year. They also make a big thing about the costumes. They go to Paris Fashion Week for that stuff as well. So, Philippines is the support studio. Pune, as I said, was doing Prince of Persia. Quebec is the second studio in Canada. That's where they did Assassin's Creed Odyssey and Immortals Phoenix Rising. Ubisoft Toronto is where they did Atlas, Starlink, Battle for Atlas. Reflections They don't really do much anymore, but that's where the Driver series started out with. As I said, San Francisco, you know, Rocksmith is what they're working on currently. Shanghai, as I said, Singapore is where Skull and Bones is coming out of, if it ever actually releases, which should be soon because they're starting to do technical tests. Sofia, Stockholm, and I said Toronto. So there's a lot of studios. And so Ubisoft Montreal, let's go back up here. There we are, there we are. So as I said, they're known for Assassin's Creed, Far Cry, For Honor, you know, so sort of lead the big tentpole studios. What is interesting is, you know, they will do the design, they start building everything, but right, when they clock off at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, you know, that's when Pune is coming online, that's when Kiev's coming online, that's when Stockholm's coming online. So they'll start then talking about those games and those, you know, they'll pick up the assets so that, you know, the workload for them for the day will be to finish off the model design, right, or the city building, right? And then when they close everything down, that's when Montreal is coming back in for the next day of business. So it's very cyclical like that. So that's why it's not uncommon to see in the credits of Ubisoft games that, you know, development is led by Montreal, but supported by Singapore, Kiev, Bucharest, Pune, Mumbai, you know, Annecy, whatever. So the fact that Ubisoft has made, it's not that they just moved it, it's they made a public statement to say, hey, we're taking this game away from these new studios. So Mumbai and Pune are some of the newest studios Ubisoft has started up. They're not acquisitions. They literally started these studios up to make use of the talent in India. They basically said, hey, the game is not delivering an experience that we're happy with. They gave them more time. It hasn't worked. So they said, cool, we're taking it back. We're giving it to Montreal, which is the flagship. It's like, you know, ABC Studios making, you know, Marvel TV shows like Inhumans, which didn't work for them. So Marvel Studios took the Inhumans back into their own world to say, hey, we're going to do things within ourselves. So this is where a lot of that stuff sort of comes in. The fact that Ubisoft publicly announced this, that's where the interesting thing comes in, because they don't do this. It's very rare for companies to announce this stuff. So, you know, we saw that Metroid Prime 4 got one, where they said, hey, you know, the developers that we never formally knew who the developers were working on it, but Nintendo said, hey, we're not happy with what's happening with it. We're restarting development back at Retro. There was another one earlier in the year as well that got moved. The development for it went back to someone else. So it's very rare for it to happen, and very, very rare for it to happen publicly. But it is unsurprising given how often this game has been delayed. So at this point, Beyond Good and Evil 2 and Skull and Bones are their longest in development games. Skull and Bones is about 8 years now. Beyond Good and Evil 2 is a little bit longer. Until those games come out, no other game can ever beat it, because, you know, until they're released, they're always going to be the longest. But Prince of Persia Sands of Time Remake is going to be one of those ones as well, because it's not expected now from the full statement. You know, they didn't even say anything, but the last we heard was it wasn't going to release until the end of the Ubisoft 2023 fiscal year, which is March 31st next year. So we're not going to see this game until April 1st next year at the earliest currently, from the last we heard, but with the shift in developers, it could be even longer. Moving on to some interesting news, World of Warcraft, or Warcraft in general, has a new game coming. Now, this is obviously a little different to what you may be expecting. This is not Warcraft 4. This is not a new expansion for World of Warcraft. That was a few weeks ago. This is not a, you know, different version of Hearthstone or anything like that. This is a completely mobile-developed version, mobile-developed game set within the World of Warcraft. Not World of Warcraft, the MMO, but within the overarching, you know, Warcraft universe. So all we know is that this game is... let me move off the cinematic trailer. That doesn't really make sense, that one. So this is a mobile game. This is made for mobiles. They're not ruling out a PC adaptation for it yet, but it is a full-on mobile game. Let me move to the actual thing. So it's designed to be played sort of one-handed. To me, you know, it's very tower defense style, not full tower defense, but you know, there's something like 130 levels for this game across various things. it has the creatures, the locations, all that sort of stuff from the Warcraft series that people know and people love. So you're either gonna, you know, be all on board for this, or you're not. I just realized one thing. I don't think the there we go. Yeah, so, you know, it's either going to be your cup of tea or it's not. Now, what is interesting about this is, so the full game is called Warcraft Arclight Rumble. But what is interesting is that it isn't, you know, King, who's an Activision subsidiary like Blizzard is, that's gone out of their way to develop this for Blizzard. This is Blizzard developed. So this is a completely Blizzard developed title, in-house. You know, Diablo Immortal isn't Blizzard in-house. It's Blizzard are overseeing development of that, but it's actually been done externally, whereas this is completely internal. So, you know, it is interesting. I don't think it's for me because I generally don't play mobile games at all. They just never appeal to me. You know, usually it's the control schemes where they'll try and replicate on-screen controls for a controller, but at the moment, you know, that never works. Or they fill it with monetization. Now, we don't know anything about this one in terms of the costs. You know, will this be a full purchase game, or will this be something else? We honestly don't know. It could be something big, it could be nothing. We just have to wait and see for it, unfortunately. But yeah, again, it's one of those things. They've done a deep dive on their YouTube channel for the game, where they sort of talk about more of the experience that players can expect. But yeah, again, I'm not a big mobile player personally, but you know, Blizzard have had some luck with Hearthstone. Diablo Immortal shaping up to be a pretty standard Diablo experience, just on a phone. So it could be something very, very cool. The last sort of thing we're going to talk about before we get into the release schedule is in honor of Star Wars Day, which happened a couple of days ago on May 4th. We took a look at all the games that are currently announced within the world of Star Wars and what they're all about. So when we say announced, we're not talking about, you know, my friends, cousins, uncles, brothers, sisters, best mates, you know, former fiance heard from their barber that some guy who worked for a company said they're making a Star Wars game. No, we looked at this. These are all the publicly announced games, right? So EA, you know, they announced 3 games earlier in the year, which we'll get to when we get through the list. They may have an additional 2 in development right now, right? But if they're not public, we didn't look at them because we didn't want to base a list based on, you know, put a list together based on speculation, because that's just not entertaining. So we're going through this list. We're going to start with the sort of the ones that we know the most about, which is the ones, you know, have release dates or release windows. The first one is Star Wars Hunters. So Star Wars Hunters is a free-to-play battle arena style game of 5v5. You know, it's developed by Zynga. So it's developed by Natural Motion, which is a Zynga studio, and Zynga are publishing it as well. It is coming to Switch, iOS and Android. So just the Switch console and the 2 mobile platforms. It's just a third-person shooter. So you see, if you're watching the video, you're seeing, watching the Twitch stream, you're seeing some of the gameplay now. The big thing is that there's going to be a lot of you know, characters. So the droid Jedi we're looking at now, he's J3DI. You know, there's a couple of Jawas that are stacked like, you know, the kids in the trench coat. There's if you've seen The Mandalorian season 1, Quill. He's Sirius the Ugnaughts. He's a character here. Not Quill himself, but that species. We've got a Han Solo smuggler type. There was a Sith acolyte there. We've got a former stormtrooper. There's a Wookiee. That's a bounty hunter. You know, so they've got similar sort of things. You know, when you're playing as a bounty hunter, you get some, you know, the rope gun, you know, jetpack, stuff like that. There's the stormtrooper. He's a heavy gunner, so he's got a big heavy gun that can deal out damage, but he's slow moving. So there's a lot of that sort of stuff. It is set after the events of Return of the Jedi, so it's set sort of within the same period as the Mandalorian and Boba Fett TV shows. We don't know how close it is to it. We don't know if it's like 2 weeks after the fall of, or the end of Return of the Jedi, or 6 years. They've not said anything like that. It's just set after that period, but before the prequel movies. So yeah, it was due to soft launch back late last year on mobile. That didn't happen. And while it was meant to release early this year on all platforms, it has now been delayed again. They're now just aiming for a 2022 release, so we don't know anything more than that. The next one we sort of know a bit more about is Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order 2. That's not its full title. We actually don't know that yet. But we know that it is in development at Respawn Entertainment, and it is due or planned to be released later this year. There are some reports that it may slip until early next year, sort of the January-February window, but they're not confirmed at this point. EA have never actually dated the game either, so it's hard to say it's been delayed because we've never actually had a date. We do know that it is going to continue the story of Cal Kestis. It is being developed by Respawn, by the same team that did the first game, same director as well. So it is essentially just going to be more of the same. I fully expect we'll see more of this one at Star Wars Celebration at the end of the month. Whether or not we see, gameplay then, who knows? We should see just more of it. Also, the big rumor is that it is dropping PS4 and Xbox One from its platforms. So it'll be a purely next generation game only. So PC, PS5, and Xbox Series X and S. Again, it's supposed to release either late this year or very early next year. So it is technically the one that we should expect after Hunters. Looking next, we're going to take a look at Star Wars Eclipse. Now this is very, very different. Now obviously Eclipse is being developed by Quantic Dream. Detroit Become Human was sort of their most recent game. And whether you're a fan of the developer leading the studio or not, we're not getting into that here. We're just going to talk about the game. Eclipse is very different because it is actually set during the era of the High Republic. Now the High Republic is something that most generalist Star Wars fans probably don't know much about yet. It is currently available in book form only. So the High Republic started last year as a series of books and comics. It is set 200 years. The High Republic is 200 years before the events of the Phantom Menace. So there is no Qui-Gon Jinn, there's no R2-D2. R2-D2's not being shoehorned in somewhere here like he was in there. The only character that's in the High Republic that is in the trilogy, or the trilogy of trilogies that we have from Star Wars, is Yoda, just seeing on the screen there. Because when we first meet him originally in The Empire Strikes Back, he's 900 years old, so he was around during the High Republic. Now this is going to be a narrative-driven game, so it's going to be focusing a lot on choice. So very much like the Knights of the Old Republic style. Not saying it is that, I'm just saying in terms of, choice is going to be a big factor here. So Quantic Dream, that is one of the big things, is its choice. So when Detroit Become Human came out, there were characters that you could play as for 4 or 5 hours throughout the experience that would, you'd make a decision and it would lead to their death, and that was the end of their story. Right? You didn't get to reload a save and try again. If the choice you made led to their death, that was it. There was nothing beyond that for that character. And when you saw the end result of the overall story, you could see that they died 60% of the way through the full story, right? So we don't know how much is going to be based around that, for this, if it's going to be something that in-depth, or it's going to be a bit lighter because it's Star Wars. We just know it's about choice. We also know that it's going to be set in a new sort of region beyond the Outer Rim. So it's not going to be a well-known area. So, as I said here in the text, we're not going to be seeing Tatooine a lot in this because Tatooine is a known planet. They're very keen to say it is an uncharted area. We just have to sort of wait and see how it is. There is no date on this one. It was announced late last year at the Game Awards, so people are hoping for a 2023 release. But development apparently only started a few months before the game was formally announced. So even if it is the actual case that has only just started, a late 2023 would be optimistic. But hey, stranger things have happened. The other game that we got revealed late last year was that Massive Entertainment, the folks behind the Avatar game coming out this year, and the Division series for Ubisoft, is also developing a Star Wars game. Details on this are even less than Eclipse. We know it is an open world game. I stopped because that was all we know. So we know it's open driven, we know it's a story focused open world game, but that's it. We know nothing beyond that. We don't know platforms, we don't know if it's set in the High Republic, if it's set in the trilogies, if it's set post the trilogies, like after the events of The Last Skywalker. We don't know if it's set during the Old Republic era that Knights of the Old Republic was from. We literally know nothing about this game. We do know that the development is still trying to staff up folks. They've got roles open currently still for it. They've obviously been working on the Avatar game. The Massive studio is pretty big. There are a few hundred developers big in terms of their overall footprint, but they're not Montreal big. They're not 4,000 staff. So while they're still developing content and support for the Division 2, they've been developing the Avatar game. I can't remember what that's called now. Something Pandora, and then also now working on the Star Wars game. So it is interesting that they announced this so far out. This was also the game that basically took the exclusivity away from EA. Prior to this one, it was EA was the only developer allowed to make Star Wars. It is interesting, the terms of the deal for that still have another year or so on them, because it was a 2013 signed deal, because Disney bought Lucasfilm back in 2012. So it is very interesting that they've sort of they're almost done with 10 years. That is probably why Hunters has been delayed a little bit because of the contract, but we have to wait and see on that one. The next game we know about was announced back in September during the PlayStation Showcase, and that is that Aspire Media, another one of the Embracer Group, are remaking Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic exclusively for PlayStation 5 and PC. So the reason why we say exclusively is because PlayStation themselves are helping to foot the bill of the development. Not the full bill, but part of it. It will launch first on PlayStation 5 and then come out to PC a little later. So it's not going to be a day and date for both. At least that was what was indicated last year when it was announced. It will eventually come to Xbox, but it's going to be at least a year of exclusivity, if not longer. So think the deals for Deathloop and Ghostwire Tokyo. Those games will eventually make their way to Xbox, especially because they're now made by Microsoft-owned studios. But they have a year exclusivity on PlayStation platforms. Other than the fact they're working on it, and it is a full remake, we know nothing else about this game. Which is a bit of a trend that this list is sort of generated because of how secretive Disney are with Star Wars things. Even the reveal trailer for this one didn't have anything other than, a guy in shadow and a lightsaber turning on. So, I'll just have the little trailer here play for a second. As you can see, if you're watching it, it's very, very atmospheric. And then, out comes the lightsaber. And then the lightsaber goes on. And that was it. But this alone was enough to get fans excited because, the design, the lightsaber, the mask we now see, that's Revan. That was the big baddie of the game. Which turns out to be the player. So it was very, very cool that they're remaking it. It was also then like a month and a half later that the Switch got the original game that Aspire also ported across. So Aspire definitely know the Knights of the Old Republic. They're the studio that ported the series to iOS years ago and Mac, and more recently, PlayStation 4 and Switch. So beyond that, though, we don't have a release date for it. It's just so far out. They're not even talking about that yet. Now, the next three games, I should say, are the ones we know the least about. We're sort of going into descending order. We know more about this one than we do the last one on the list. But the Star Wars FPS is another game developed by Respawn. So Respawn, earlier in the year, they confirmed the Jedi Fallen Order sequel, announced the Star Wars FPS, and the next game we're going to talk about. But the Star Wars FPS, the big things for this one is it's being directed by Peter Hirschman, who recently directed the Medal of Honor Above and Beyond VR game for Respawn, which contained the Oscar-winning short Colette. Peter Hirschman is also one of the creative directors and people behind the original Medal of Honor back on PlayStation. So one of the people that created that series, he's there. The other interesting thing about him is after working for DreamWorks Games, which is where Medal of Honor was made for many years, he left there and went to Lucasfilm and oversaw the production of, the Force Unleashed games, the Lego Star Wars games, anything essentially Lucasfilm related, which is mostly Star Wars, for a decade and a bit. He was sort of in charge of. So he definitely knows his Star Wars and he knows his FPSs. So it should be a good thing. Respawn have many teams now. So they've got a team in Canada that focuses primarily on Apex Legends, which they just sort of debuted Newcastle, which is the newest Legends for that game. They've got their Respawn, their Fallen Order team. They've now got an FPS team, and they've also got an Apex team in Los Angeles. So they are quite a bit bigger than most people expect them to be. In terms of when this is coming out or platforms, we know nothing. We know it's going to be an FPS. We know it's going to be a story-based thing. Beyond that, we don't know. We don't know if it's going to be a VR-only game. We don't know if it's going to be an Xbox-only game. We don't know if it's going to be, a third-person battle royale game. We just know we know it won't be a third-person game because it's a first-person shooter. But we just know that it's a Star Wars shooter being developed by Respawn. The other Respawn game that was announced earlier in the year is partly Respawn, but it's primarily being done by a studio called BitReactor. So BitReactor formed in early mid-January 2022, and then 3 days later they announced this game. It is a strategy game. So BitReactor is actually founded by the former art director from Fireaxis Entertainment, the folks behind XCOM, Civilization, and such. He started the studio up to focus on strategy games to make them very different from what people expect from a strategy game. What that means in the long term, we don't know. But this is a strategy game being developed by them and with Respawn Entertainment supporting where they can. As it's a strategy game, expected to hit PC first, or at least on PC. The comments from Greg Forchett, who's the studio founder, is that he wants to make a strategy game that works as well on consoles as it does on PC. So there is a fair chance that this game will come to consoles. There's just no telling on what those consoles are. The final game that was announced was actually just announced last week, and it is an interesting one because it is being developed by Skydance New Media. So Skydance is a formerly film production company. They branched out a few years ago into video games. The first property is based on a Marvel license. We don't know anything other than that for that one. But they announced, back when they announced that Amy Hennig, who is the former creative director and writer for the Uncharted games back on the PS3, was hired to run the studio. When she left Naughty Dog during the early days of Uncharted 4, she went to Visceral Games and started working on a thing that was called Project Ratbag. It was a Star Wars game meant to essentially be like an Uncharted but Star Wars. EA didn't like where that game was going apparently, and they killed it, and then they killed the studio. So when she left there, she floated around doing who knows what for a while, found herself here. She is now directing a new Star Wars game. We know it's going to be a story-based adventure, so narrative adventure. That's it. We know nothing else about this game. We don't know, if Skydance New Media has developers in-house to do this, if they're bringing, an external studio on board to do the development. We literally know nothing beyond that it exists, that Amy Hennig is involved, and it's a narrative-based game. So, yeah, so in terms of releases, we should see Hunters released sometime this year for Switch and mobile. Maybe the Fallen Order sequel later this year. Other than that, we're sort of tapped out on Star Wars at the moment. Obviously, we just got Lego Star Wars: The Skywalker Saga. For Star Wars Day, they just dropped a bunch of DLC in terms of just character packs. But in terms of more Star Wars this year, we've only got a few things to look forward to. Now, in terms of games coming out in the next sort of 7 days. As I said, today is February 6th. So that means we're looking here from the Saturday, the 7th, which is, there's no game releases on a Saturday, but we're looking basically to the 13th, right? So we've got Euden Chronicles Rising, which is coming to all platforms on the 10th of May. Sultan Sacrifice, which is a sort of 2D style Dark Souls-ish game, is coming to both PlayStation and PC. And then We Were Here Forever is coming to all platforms but Switch on the 10th as well. So the 10th is a bit of a big day, a lot of sort of indie sort of focused titles. Euden Chronicles Rising is launching inside of Game Pass and PC Game Pass. So if you have either Xbox or PC Game Pass or Xbox Game Pass Ultimate, or Xbox Ultimate, whatever they call it these days, you'll get that game there. On the 12th of May, the Centennial Case, a Shijima story, is coming out from Square Enix for both PC, Switch, PS4 and PS5. That is a FMV-focused narrative whodunit sort of game. So it's essentially a visual novel, but instead of just 2D cutouts on backgrounds, it'll be video shot with actors and such like that. And the next Friday will be the launch of Evil Dead the Game, which stars Bruce Campbell. He's back. He's producing the game, but he's also voicing Ash in that one as well. And that is one of those 4-player survival games, and it is being developed by Saber Interactive and Boss D Games. So Saber Interactive were, so the World War Z guys, the folks doing the Witcher stuff. It does have some of the actors from the more recent TV series back doing their, voicing their versions of the characters in this as well. Other than that, though, and there's not much we know about it. There is some game footage out there as well. They've done some stuff for it in terms of promoting it, but it's still very, very much, an unknown in terms of things. But that's it. That brings us to the end of another episode of the Maxi-Geek Show. As I said, we record these live every Friday at 7 PM Australian Eastern Standard Time on Twitch, over at twitch.tv/MaxiGeek with an underscore at the end. We are live every Tuesday at 7 PM for the our game streaming series, whatever that happens to be. At the moment, we're playing through the James Bond console games. We're currently playing through GoldenEye Rogue Agent. So we stream every Tuesday for that. We stream every Friday for the Maxi-Geek Show. And occasionally we'll pop up with a random stream here or there when we're feeling a bit, bit adventurous. Outside of that, this show is also on YouTube. It goes up every Saturday. So if you are, wanting to just catch it at your own leisure, maybe watch it on your phone, this is where you can do that as well. We'll be back next Friday for another episode of the Maxi-Geek Show. So until we talk next time online, happy gaming.